Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Welcome to another video. I got a new camera. I bet you a lot of you got a new camera yesterday too, August 20th. That's when you were supposed to be able to get them. The Canon R5 Mk. And here I am the next morning, because yesterday afternoon, of course, it was storming here in Florida, and so I didn't get to do a whole lot with it. Shooting wise, I did go through all the menus and things like that, but I'm out shooting this morning, so not a lot of time on the camera yet, but enough to tell you a few things, my initial impressions about this camera, and I think you're going to want to hear them. And if you do, hey, stay tuned. What do you guys think? Huh? I like it. We're out of the field, or I'm out of the field, back in my studio talking about the new Canon R5 Mk. And yeah, you know, I think I'm going to start this whole thing. For those of you who don't like to sit around and watch a long video, because it's not going to be real long. I've only had the camera for like a day and a half. But I'm going to start this out by saying basically what I was hoping for from this camera and what I actually think I've got in my hands now with this camera. I was hoping to have this camera. This is the R3. I love this camera, except for the fact that it's 24 megapixels. What did I want from the R5 Mk? I wanted this camera with 45 megapixels. And I will tell you that even after just a day and a half, just a little bit of going through the menus, going through the camera, taking it out and shooting it just a little bit, I am really, really excited because I think I've got close to the R3 in the R5 Mk. And so we'll go over some of the details of why I think that. First of all, it's 45 megapixels. Yeah, so that made the big leap. The thing I wanted in the R3's got the performance. The R5 Mk, well, let's talk about the old R5. The old R5. It is old now. It's 4 years old, going on 5 years old, whatever. You know, it was a good camera when it came out. Autofocus was good, performance overall was good. But when the R3 came out, the autofocus and the way it was arranged and just its capabilities and its speed and accuracy was on another level from the R5. But it only had 24 megapixels. Now, does this have the performance with 45 megapixels that the R3 has? So let's talk about, got some notes here because there's lots to talk about, really, even after just having the camera for a day and a half. I'm going to break this down right out of the box. What I saw with the R5 Mk. I'm going to break it down into the ergonomics of the body itself, the menu-related things that I saw that were different, better, maybe not better, shooting-related things. How did it work in the field? That's really, is it the most important thing? Yes, of course, it's the most important thing, but so is ergonomics and stuff. It can be important. That's one thing I loved about I loved, right? Yeah, we're moving on. Next camera. No, I still love the ergonomics of this body. It's light. The grip fits my hand like a glove. I've talked about this before. We'll talk about that in the R5 Mk. And then we'll talk about the files, right? Image quality and post-processing and dynamic range and stuff from the few files that I've taken with this camera. So that's how we're going to go through this. All right, so let's move on to some actual specifics here. Not a big deal, you think? Not something that's important? The eye cup. The eye cup on the R3. If you'll notice, there is no eye cup on the R3, on my R3. I take it off because I hate it. It's this flimsy, really soft rubber that tears, just taking it in and out of your bag, and then it gets messed up and you're trying to shoot. It is important, because if it messes up you getting shots, it's an important thing. The R5 Mark II is more like the R5, okay? It's kind of a fixed eye cup. It's strong rubber. It's pretty firm. Much better right off the bat, I think. So, an improvement over the R5? No. The original R5? No. Over the R3? Yes. Is it really similar to the R5s? Yes, it is. And I like the R5's eye cup. It's much bigger, the viewfinder. We'll talk about that. It's the R3. That's why I have the R3 up here and not the old R5. Because it's so much similar. It's so similar to the R3 in many ways. It's the same viewfinder now as in the R3, and we'll talk about that. The grip on the R5 Mark II. I grip this camera. Is it quite the same as the R3? Let's get over here. No, not quite. There's a little more of a bump here for my pinky to rest on. Then on the R5, there's really not. I've got the grip on here, the regular battery grip, the new one, of course. I also have, the cooling grip. That's going to be a whole nother video when we're talking about video, shooting video on the R5 Mark II. It doesn't have quite that pinky nestled in kind of feel, but I'll tell you what, it's got a nice grip. For my hand size and for me, it's the close. I love the grip on the R3. It's the best I've ever held on to as far as a camera body. And I don't care if you're talking about Sony, Nikon, it doesn't matter. Old Canon cameras, it is the best that I've ever gripped. This is second best now. It's almost the same as the R3, and that's with the grip on it. Now you shoot the vertical grip. The vertical grip on the old R5 is horrible. The vertical grip on the R3, of course, is built in, so it's nice. This is the best vertical battery grip I have held. It is so much closer to the actual landscape grip, if that's what you want to call it, versus the vertical or portrait grip. It's very, very similar. It's not super wide. It's not super uncomfortable with weird things in weird places. The buttons and dials are all right there. It's the closest vertical grip, battery grip, to the regular grip that I've seen, that I've used. I like that. Because you shoot vertical. I'm a bird photographer. I shoot vertical a lot, actually. It's nice to have that. Overall, the size of the body, I think, is great. Okay, I think it's great. It's not so small that it's a problem. It's not so big and bulky that it's a problem, like the old 1DX Mark II or whatever you want to go back into the digital SLR, days. I think it's really close to the R3. The battery grip, I have to have it. It's just a thing for me. 2 batteries, large cards. That way I don't have to worry about running out of battery power for the most part. Takes a new battery, of course. Can take the older batteries, but you lose some functionality from the camera. But these run at higher voltage. The new EP6. What are these things? What are they called? E6P. I'm dyslexic. Okay. The new LP-E6P batteries, they're available out there. I've got 3 more coming. I've got 3, so I should have plenty. That's 3 changeouts in the battery grip. That should be good. It runs at a higher voltage than the old batteries. Battery life so far on these batteries and this battery grip seem really, really good. Really good. So, overall, I like the ergonomics of the body. One more thing about the ergonomics, if this is ergonomics. There's a cap over the multifunction shoe up here, the hot shoe used to call it. Now it's called a multifunction shoe because you don't want it to get wet. R3s, notice I don't have one on there. The damn thing keeps falling off. Okay, well, they fixed that. There's a little lock on here now. Does this one fit on the R3? Yep, it does. I'm getting more of these. That's a nice positive change. It stays on. It doesn't just fall off like the old ones. It's an important thing. You can't get it wet. Short out the camera. Maybe. Never had a problem with it so far, but it could. Otherwise, they wouldn't do this. They fixed that. Super. All right. Moving on from ergonomics to some menu-related things in the camera. I'm going to break away from watching me talk now from time to time, and we'll look at the menus a little bit. Believe me, I'm going to be doing more videos on this camera. Menu deep dive for my setup for bird photography, birds in flight, that's coming. It's going to take a little longer. I need to shoot the camera for a while before I settle in on settings. There's some different stuff available in this camera, from the old R5 for sure, and even from the R3. So, anyway, overall the menus are different. They're set up different. The numbering and then the explanation for each menu and each menu tab in the menu is much better. I like it. More detailed information so you kind of know where you are in there. So I like that. It's really cool now because what Canon did is they give you the choice for your card space. It used to say how many pictures you had left. Well, that varied, you know, because depending on how much detail was in your pictures, they took up different amounts of space, each picture, so it was kind of a guesstimate. And looking at, now you can get a percentage. You can set it to give you a percentage of the card that's free. I like that. I like that a lot. That's a neat little change. It's funny, when you go into the AF menu now, there used to be, when we started out quite a few years ago now with the digital SLRs and stuff, you had these cases, these bins. I think there used to be 5 or 6 of them that you could set up for different kinds of photography scenarios, action or stuff, whatever. And you had 3 parameters in there: tracking sensitivity, switching track subjects, XL, decel tracking, this kind of stuff, right? Now, come all the way down the line, many years later, to the R5 Mark II. The cases are now gone. I find that interesting. You have 2 choices now. You have auto and you have manual. And in the manual setting, you have 2 parameters you can change: XL, decel tracking and tracking sensitivity. And in auto, you can change your tracking sensitivity. They don't call it that. They call it something else, and here it is. And I think it's the switching track subjects, what they used to call switching track subjects. That's gone. That terminology in the menu is gone. So now in the auto, you have 1 parameter you can set to locked on or all the way over to responsive. And that's the switching track subject kind of tracking sensitivity thing kind of wrapped into one there. So I find that interesting, but I think it's a good thing. It was overly complex before. I basically set my case to auto on the R3 and on the R5 once that came along. Firmware updates did that for us. I set it to auto. I'm setting it to auto now, and now in auto you got a little something that you can set. For me, it's set to locked on. Maybe you want it responsive. It's a personal thing. So anyway, thought that was interesting. You get a lot of information, you can anyway, in a menu in the R5 Mark II to show you all sorts of stuff about your batteries. How much power's left on them, of course. Hey, how's the charging going? Is it taking full charges, or is it starting to wear out and it's not really charging very well anymore? So you're not going to get much life, you know, in the camera out of them. And you know, how many shutter actuations are in each battery? That's good stuff to know, because you don't want batteries to start to fail on you in the field. If you keep track of them, you can buy batteries proactively to replace the ones that are wearing out. And I've wore out batteries. So I think that's cool. There's a whole new menu in this camera. Customized shooting controls. Controls for shooting. Well, it's right here. Anyway, it's a whole new menu. It's a whole new menu. It's early in the morning. I'm not going to say what time it is, but it's early. So I've been messing around with this and trying to get this video out to y'all. So my speech is a little messed up this morning. That's why. A new menu, customized controls for when you're shooting. It breaks out from the custom shooting menu. Now there's two menus. Here they are, this one and this one. And I like it. It makes more sense. The terminology used in these menus makes more sense for each of the different menu items that you can choose and make changes in. So anytime a camera company does that, I like it. It makes it easier for everybody to understand what their settings are and make the correct choices. So I like the new menu. So that's about it for menu items at this point. Again, I'm going much deeper into the menus in a different video. That's a long video in and of itself, and we'll get to that in a few weeks. I'll be shooting this camera extensively now that I have it for weeks. I'll put tens of thousands of images on this camera, and then I'll come back. I'll have settled on my settings, and I'll do a deep dive into the menu system, my setup for me, of course, for birds and birds in flight. So look out for that video coming up soon. Moving on to shooting related stuff. This is what everybody wants to hear, right? There's new things in these cameras now. The R1s, the R5 Mark II, they have AI stuff all built in there now. You can register people's faces, record them, and then when you're shooting that person, it'll know, oh, you go to that person, you say, oh, he's telling me just to stay on this person, and I see that person's face, and I stay focused on that person. Wow, that's cool. People's faces. So you're saying, what does that have to do with birds? Bird photography, birds in flight? Nothing. And I say nothing because, you know what, I actually tried to register a bird's face, a bird's head, an owl, a barred owl. Wouldn't let me. Why? Because it's not a people. It's not a person. Bummer. Hey, if you can do it for people, why can't you do it for specific species of animals? That's coming next. I think that's going to happen. A barred owl's face is very unique looking. Why can't you register that? And then turn that on when you're shooting barred owls. And it finds the barred owl. Keeps track on the barred owl. It seems possible to me. I think we should talk to Canon about that and look for that coming up. Why not? Why not make it so easy that you can't mess it up? I need that. Do you need that? I need that. So, the register people's thing for people's faces doesn't work for birds. Probably doesn't work for mammals either, like an elk or something, or a moose. Oh well. The viewfinder. Talked about that a little bit already. On this camera, the R5 Mark II, it's basically the same viewfinder now as the R5, or the R3. All these R's and numbers and stuff. Anyway, it's the same now. These are the same viewfinders, basically. I love the viewfinder from the R3. I now love the viewfinder from the R5 Mark II. It is much improved over the R5 as far as my assessment goes. So I'm happy. It's bigger and everything. It's like, because it has now the eye-controlled autofocus. Same as in the R3. R5 didn't have that, of course. Have I messed with that yet in the R5 Mark II? No, because it's basically the same as in the R3, and I did mess with it a lot in the R3, and I don't find it to be much use for what I do. So I haven't really messed with it yet. I will, and I might do a video on it if I find it useful for some reason in the future. This is a big one. What I'm about to say is huge for those of you who shoot the R5. The thing I loved about the R3 versus the R5 is when the viewfinder will go to sleep and then, oh, all of a sudden there's a shooting opportunity. Instantly you bring it up. The R3, the viewfinder comes right on instantly. The R5 has a delay. And man, what a pain. I had to sit there and half press, half press, half press, half press all the time on the R5 to keep the viewfinder alive in those situations. And sometimes you forget because not a lot is happening. And then all of a sudden something does happen, and the delay in the viewfinder coming back on would cost me shots. I know it costs you shots. The R5 Mark II, you will be happy to know. Again, it's the same viewfinder now as the R. It comes on instantly. That problem is now gone from the R5. The problem that was in the R5 with the viewfinder is now solved or taken care of in the R5 Mark II. That is huge for me. All right. The buffer size in the R5 Mark II is great. Shooting RAW, shooting C-RAW, pretty good number of shots you can rattle off, and you won't hit the buffer, even at 45 megapixels. And the buffer dump is really fast to the card that I'm using so far in this camera, the R5 Mark II, which is a Lexar Compact Flash Express card, a 1 terabyte card. It dumps extremely fast. Comparing it to the R3, I think it's just about as fast. And that's pretty amazing given that you're moving a lot more data here than in here. So I'm happy with the buffer so far, unlike the R7 or something like that where the buffer is just a joke. This is up there, what you need for professional use, high enthusiast use, right? You guys that aren't professionals, and I use guys as a unisex term, okay, for men and women. You know, you're not professionals, but you're professionals. Kind of, you're enthusiasts. You're good. You want this kind of performance. You've got it in the R5 Mark II. The buffer, I don't think. We shot it for a little while. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I don't think I will. I think the buffer is going to be just fine, and the buffer dump speed is just fine on Compact Flash Express cards. On slower SD cards, you know, yeah, it's not going to go as fast. But anyway, I shoot Compact Flash Express almost exclusively, so for me, it looks good. What else we got here? The R5 shooting video and even stills, the old R5, would get hot. I live in Florida. It's hot here right now. This camera, that one, this little icon would come up, like right up here in the upper-ish right. And it would start out clear and then go white and then red, and then it would even shut down if it got too hot. Well, that's fine. This camera has that too, except it has a scale. It pops up and it has marks, kind of like the battery marks, you know. Well, this tells you, it kind of shows you how it's progressing. It gives, I think it's better. It's more precise. And so you can see how warm your camera is actually getting and anticipate a little bit better when it might be getting too hot and it's going to shut down. Hopefully it doesn't. It's supposed to handle heat a lot better. I can't tell you anything about that right now. Haven't shot it enough. But I will tell you about that later on. So anyway, I thought the little scale thing was interesting. Autofocus related stuff that we haven't talked about yet. Like I said early on, I wanted to pick up the R5 Mark II and basically think I was shooting the R5 or the R3. I wanted to pick up the R5 Mark II and basically think I was shooting the R3 because I love this camera so much, how it shoots, the speed, the accuracy, everything about it. Except that it's 24 megapixels, like I said. I wanted it to feel like I'm shooting this camera, but knowing that I'm shooting actually 45 megapixels. And you know what? I kind of do. Even after just shooting it a little bit, I'm really excited, like I said at the very beginning, about this camera because the autofocus, that's part of the whole overall feel. It's a big part. The autofocus seems to be as reactive and accurate and fast and everything else as the R3s. It's the same structure. You've got flexible zones now. You even got some more things in here as far as autofocus areas that you can choose from. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, the autofocus of the R5 Mark II is much better than the R5s. It should be. It is. It's taken me up toward the R3 here. If it isn't equal to it, it's right there. Dual pixel autofocus. In all of these cameras so far, the R1 has quad pixel, or they call it cross type. The R5 Mark II, again, I've only shot it a little bit, but it seems like it's still really, really attracted to vertical elements in the frame. That's a consequence of dual pixel autofocus and how it's designed. Quad pixel will fix that. It seems like it's still somewhat of a problem, you want to call it that, in the R5 Mark II. If you got blades of grass, man, it's this tiny little blade of grass, and bam, it goes to that instead of the bird's head behind it. It kind of still does that. I don't have enough time on the camera yet to really know if it's improved at all over the R3 or the R5, but it still seems to kind of be there. Overall, though, the autofocus is right up there with the R3, and that is a very, very good thing. Okay, and I just mentioned that there were some other things in here with the autofocus. Choices of autofocus area. There's a set of new looking icons in there. Spot, 1 point or single point, surround points, and then there's a little lock symbol at the bottom of those. What the heck are those? Well, I can tell you what they are. And it's an automatic choice. You can pick it really quick, and it sets it to no subject of particular interest, like people or vehicles or animals, and it also turns full frame tracking off. So if you have, let's say you're shooting 1 point autofocus and you have full frame tracking on and you have it set to animals, well, you could quickly change to 1 point with the lock symbol and it automatically turns off full frame tracking and goes to no particular type of subject that it's looking for. I think that's what that does. I think that's what those choices are. That's the best I could figure it out. If I'm wrong, if that's not what those do, then please let me know in the comments section below. I have never, ever even pretended that I know everything about these cameras. I look into them very closely and I get to know them really, really well. But I think that's what that is. So anyway, moving on. The shutters of the R5 Mark II, electronic shutter and mechanical shutter. We still have a mechanical shutter, which I think is great. Nikon and Sony now, they're going completely away from mechanical shutters. We still have a mechanical shutter on the R5 Mark II. And let's talk about the electronic shutter first, because here we go. Here's another thing that used to just kill me, bother the heck out of me with the R5. You put in electronic shutter and there was no shutter noise that you could turn on. You know, tick, 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 right? A fake one. Wasn't there. Never did come to that camera. Ha! We got it in the R5 Mark II. Of course we do, because all the other cameras since the R5 have it. The R5 Mark II has it. Is that a big deal? It is to me, because I like to hear when I'm shooting there are times. It's not just an aesthetic thing. It's not just a nostalgic thing because I like to hear myself shooting. I've talked about this before. It's because in certain situations, I've got neuropathy in my hands are freezing cold, I'm shooting up in the Arctic or something like that, I've got gloves on, I think I'm pressing the shutter button and taking pictures, and I'm not on the R5, and you think, oh, there's the flickering frame in there. I'm not concentrating on that. When I've got a spectacled eider flying at me, I'm concentrating on the head of that bird, that's all I see, I don't know. I couldn't hear I was shooting, and sometimes I actually wasn't. Now, that's all gone. So here you go. Here's the menu item, and you can see that we have a volume control now for the shutter, which is awesome. I think that's great. The other cool thing about the electronic shutter in this camera is that you have H+, H, and then low and lower speeds of frames per second. In the R5, when you shot an electronic shutter, you shot 20 frames per second or you shot one shot. Nothing in between. Now in the R5 Mark II, you can shoot 30 frames per second just like you can in the R3, but you can also slow it down. So H+, H, and the other speed settings do affect. They come into play now for the electronic shutter just like the mechanical shutter. And you can change the frame rate, the frames per second for each one. Now, it's a little weird in how it works if you ask me. You can look at the menu here, and I'll go through this. And the fact that you can't set, like if you wanted to set H+, H, and the low setting to all 10 frames per second, it won't let you. Well, that makes some sense, but the way the information that goes along with this menu set, it looks to me like you could pick each frames per second rate for each one of those levels, but you can't. Not if it's dependent on what the other levels are set at. So if you have the H+ set at 20, you can't set the H at 20, but if you have it at the H at 20 and you want to set the H+ to something else, it won't. It only gives you 30. They're interrelated with each other so that you can't duplicate, but you also can't get at some of the other frame rates depending on what the other levels are set at. It's kind of weird. You'll get used to it. I figured it out, but it was kind of weird at first. Let me know what you think about that. It's kind of interesting. Did I confuse you? Well, yeah, I was kind of confused at the beginning too. So you'll figure it out. What else? Let's talk about the viewfinder behavior. We've been without blackout per se and lag and stuff like that for the most part, at least in the electronic shutter behavior of the viewfinder, not the LCD screen, the viewfinder, where you put your eye to look through the camera. And this camera is awesome. If you're shooting electronic shutter in H+, or H at 20 frames per second, 30 frames per second, tracking fast subjects is not an issue at all. It's wonderful. Now, when you get to the mechanical shutter, the behavior changes again. One thing I don't like about the mechanical shutter in the R5, and it's still doing it in the R5 Mark II, is that when you go to mechanical shutter, even shooting as fast a frame, set on H+, when you try to pan with a fast flying subject or a fast moving subject, the behavior, I just call it the behavior because I don't really know what it is. Is it lag? It's not blackout. It's hard to stay on a fast moving subject and be accurate about your panning. It's much different than with the electronic shutter. Try it. Shoot electronic shutter at something moving fast across, and then switch to mechanical shutter and do the same thing. And you will see that it's different. And it's much harder to be very precise in your panning in mechanical shutter. And that's still the case for the R5 Mark II. Let's talk about rolling shutter. Rolling shutter in the R5 was there. Didn't want to shoot hummingbirds in electronic shutter. This is electronic shutter we're talking about, not mechanical shutter. There's really no perceivable rolling shutter and mechanical shutter, but in electronic shutter in the R5, if you're trying to shoot something that was moving quickly through the frame, wingtips moving quickly through the frame of smaller birds like kingfishers or especially hummingbirds, you did not want to shoot electronic shutter because rolling shutter would distort the wings a lot, or even the bird a lot, if you're not panning perfectly with the speed of the bird. The R3, boy, you didn't see much, if any, issues with rolling shutter because the readout speed of the sensor was so much faster than the old R5, which was very slow. Relatively speaking, the R5 Mark II has gotten better. We'll talk about that in more detail in another video. But I wanted to see if an electronic shutter, if there's rolling shutter in there. Well, yeah, there is. If you pan really quickly, and I mean really quickly, and you're shooting a burst at 30 frames per second, and you look at your images and you look at background elements that are vertical, they are skewed a bit in the direction that you're panning. As much as the R5? No, not even close to as much as the R5. And if you're not panning super fast, you won't see any real skewing of vertical elements in the background. So it is better for sure. Is it completely gone? No. How about hummingbird wings and stuff? Well, like I said, I've only had the camera for like a day and a half. I haven't tried to shoot electronic shutter with fast-moving wingtips yet to see if that's at all of an issue. We will revisit the rolling shutter topic for the R5 Mark II at a later date. But I wanted to mention that it's not completely gone. Of course, when you're shooting electronic shutter, unless you're shooting a global shutter, it's always going to be there. But is it perceivable in your images? It still is perceivable. You can see it in the R5 Mark II in background elements. They're told if you're really pan fast, if you pan at a slower speed, slow flying bird, let's say, slower flying bird, not much in the background that you can detect. So it is better, but it's still there. Let's talk about image stabilization. The R5 Mark II versus the R5 versus the R3. I don't really notice any difference. IS on all of these cameras has been pretty good now for a while, and it's pretty amazing. So not much I'm going to say about IS and IBIS other than they work, and it works really good on the R5 Mark II on both my 200 to 800 and on my 600 f4. Those are the two lenses I've shot so far. So there you go. Now, IS is different, of course, on the 200 to 800. There's no modes and stuff, and I haven't really tested too much on, panning with this camera versus the R5 versus the R3, and if it's better, at detecting things and doing the right thing on the R3 and the R5. It sometimes isn't. Haven't had enough time on the R5 Mark II yet with this lens to really know how that has changed, if it has at all. What else we got going on here? How about ISO performance? R5 Mark II versus R3, and of course versus the real comparison versus the R5. I'm sure you've watched other videos and read things online about the ISO performance of the R5 Mark II. Given that it's a backside illuminated stack sensor, it's going to be a little bit worse. At the very lowest ISO settings, maybe it is. I don't shoot down there very much. So what I did so far, again, very little, but what I've done so far is a quick little peek at this. I shoot, my base ISO is generally, my base ISO is 800 and on up for birds and birds in flight. And when I look at 100% crops of 800 ISO, 1000, 1250, 2000, 2500, 3200, on up the line, I'll tell you what. And here, I've got some images that you can see. I'll put a link to a gallery that you can look at in the description of this video, and I'm showing you some here. Boy, I'll tell you what, it's really close to the R5 for those ISO settings, not down at 100 and that kind of stuff. I'm not going down there, and I rarely go down there. So I'm more interested at 800 and above, and to me, and if you read about the dual gain and all this kind of stuff for this camera, generally when you get into the higher ISOs, 800 and above, it's the R5 and the R5 Mark II are right neck and neck. That's a good thing. I never found the noise to be that big of a deal in the R5 Mark II. You want to compare that to the R3? You can't. You can't compare this camera, the Mark II and the old R5, to the R3, because this is 24 megapixels backside illuminated stack sensor, and the image quality, the ISO, the noise is the best I've ever shot. It's just non-existent. I'll shoot all the way up to ISO 10,000 on this camera without even thinking about it. So if you're looking for a low light, really good, low noise camera, don't look much further than the R3. You only have 24 megapixels, only, depending on what you do. But comparing the R5 Mark II to the R5, which is the comparison you're going to make, you should be making, they're neck and neck. And that is great news for me. I was a little worried about that, but even just shooting it for a little while and looking at these images, I'm not too worried about it anymore. Dynamic range of these images. I'm not doing bench testing. I just want to look at I test this stuff by looking at my images from real shoots that I do in the field. And I took images from the R5 Mark II that are way underexposed and way overexposed, and that's my definition of under and overexposed, to see if I could do what I normally need to do, or even more than I normally need to do, with shadows and highlights, as far as bringing up the shadows, bringing down the highlights if they're too bright. And I see the flexibility and the malleability of these files that I did in the R5 for sure, and even in the R3. So for me, the dynamic range, and again, I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff. I can deal with the shadows and the highlights so far, and the little bit that I've done with this camera, it seems like it's not going to be any different than working with the R3 or the R5, which is good. The dynamic range, the ability to do this with our images from Canon cameras has really improved over the years, and this camera is right up there, as far as I'm concerned, from the little bit of work I've done with the body so far. Overall IQ, image quality, coming out of this camera, 45 megapixels. I love it so far. Again, very few images on the camera, actually quite a few, thousands already. But from what I've looked at, I am not at all disappointed in the image quality. Again, I have a gallery. I want to be stocking that gallery with more and more images over the days here that I have the camera, and weeks and months moving forward. There's only a few in there now, but you can see processed and unprocessed versions of images from this camera that I've taken so far, and I think the image quality is excellent. Color is good. Everything's really nice. Overall, I'm really happy. Like I said in the beginning, I'm really excited about the R5 Mark II. I may end up just getting another one of these and have those as my two bodies, and get rid of my R3 and get rid of my old R5 and not even get an well, I'll get an R1 just because I want to see what's going on with the autofocus in that camera and everything else, but it's 24 megapixels. I want to mess with it. I want to see where Canon's going with their flagship. But will I keep one? I don't know. Because to me, 45 megapixels for birds, 2 R5 Mark IIs right now, I think, I pretty much know, would not be a bad way to go. And then you got 2 of the same bodies, and so when you grab one with this lens on it, you grab the other with the 600 on it, or you grab the other one, you know, everything's set up exactly the same, and there's a benefit to that, and I know you know that. So anyway, that would not be a bad way to go for me, may not be a bad way to go for you. Again, this is a very, very early initial thoughts on the Canon R5 Mark II. I hope this provided a little bit of information that was useful to you. And for those, I know a lot of you got this camera when I did. I get it when you do, August 20th. And, you know, what do you think? Are you seeing the same things I'm seeing? Do you feel the same way? Some people, you know, there's always people that are just like, well, that's not much of an upgrade or anything. This is a huge upgrade over the R5. I think it's a huge upgrade. To me, shooting the old R5 does not feel like shooting the R3 in any way, shape, or form to me. Shooting the R5 Mark II feels like shooting the R3 almost exactly to me at this point. That, to me, means this is a big upgrade over the R5. So I would not hesitate to tell people that if you shoot and you need the top performance from a camera, then upgrading from the R5 to the R5 Mark II, I don't do it. Even after this little bit of work that I've done so far with this camera. And I only think it's going to be reinforced as I move forward. I may be wrong. I don't think I'm going to be. So hey, there you go. Hey, stay tuned for more videos centered on the R5 Mark II. I'm going to be doing a bunch of them in the coming weeks. I hope you'll watch them. Until then, I hope you have great light. I hope you're getting great images. Be safe out there. I'll see you soon.